of today's hearings, and I'd like to welcome various diaspora groups. I might just run through the groups and ask you to name yourself and the position in which you occupy. So can I start with Diaspora Action Australia? Ms. Lazati.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Lorenza Lazzati, Program Coordinator at Diaspora Action Australia.
The Permanent Humanitarian Fund for Oromos, Mr. Arasa. You're on mute, I think, Mr. Arasa.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Tsegaye Arasa. I'm from JIRA, Permanent Humanitarian Fund for Oromos.
The Oromia Support Group Australia, Dr. Truman and Mr. Kufi.
Good afternoon. My name is Trevor Truman. I'm from the Oromia Support Group in the UK.
Mr. Kufi, each might go to someone else and then come back and see if that connection has been repaired. Mr. Arasa?
Yes.
I know you spoke earlier, so but you're speaking in this context as well.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. Yes, my name is Tsegaye Arasa. I'm an Oromo from Ethiopia. I live here in Melbourne. I've made Australia my home after fleeing a long series of persecutions in Ethiopia. I'm a co-founder and public secretary of JIRA Permanent Humanitarian Fund for Oromos, a non-profit humanitarian association providing humanitarian assistance to Oromos affected by war, displacement, and persecution. In this hearing, I speak to some of the aspects of the problems Oromos face at home and how that affects Oromos here and our communities here. You have heard already from the past presentation that Ethiopia is in multiple set of crises, in the midst of multiple crises, political, security, human rights, and humanitarian. It is submerged by a genocidal war that has devastating consequences for our peoples in Oromia, in Benishangul Gumuz, Gambella, Tsegaye, and elsewhere. Oromia at this point in time is engulfed by a prolonged war for the last 3 years, a war that is less reported about, but as brutal and genocidal as the war unfolding in Tsegaye. The war started when Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister, launched a sustained military operation to eradicate the Oromo Liberation Army in 2019. Initially, the war led to a permanent state of emergency in Wallagga, Borana, and Guji zones, but later expanded to engulf the entire nation, fueled by social militarization that the Prime Minister encouraged and valorized immediately on assuming power. Oromia was beset by the following major tragedies. First is the political assassination of prominent Oromo personalities, including artist Hachalu Hundessa. The second is the mass incarceration of many young people, the Oromo Qeerroo and Qarree, who have been at the forefront of the protest movement that spanned from 2015 up until 2018. And there is extrajudicial murder of young people and putting on a spectacle of execution to help terrorize and humiliate people into submission. Emmanuel Wandumu is a young man who was so executed in Dambidolo recently. There is arbitrary arrest and detention of prominent Oromo political leaders such as Jawar Mohammed, Baqqala Garba, Abdi Raggasa, Batte Urgeessa, Lammi Benya, and a number of others. There is also this consistent attack on Oromo media outlets, including the Oromia Media Network, the media seen by many Oromos as their public voice. In the military operations conducted in Borana, in Guji and Wallagga, houses have been razed and huts have been burned on people. Harvests have been burnt on farms, and communications and bank services have been disrupted. There is a pattern of using rape of women and young male children as a weapon of war, and again intended to humiliate and terrorize our people into submission. 6, there is extrajudicial expropriation of businesses, houses, properties, and destruction and looting of properties by the security forces in the conflict areas. And there is also the keeping of political leaders in house arrest, such as the Secretary General of the Oromo Liberation Front, Daud Ibsa, who has been in house arrest for a long time now, and misappropriating of their office properties and political party documents. At this point in time, there is famine going on in various zones in Oromia, in particular in Guji, Borana, and Karayu and Arsi, some of it fabricated by the government, some of it because of the ecological fragility of the surrounding. And so our problems are too many, and there is displacement. Mr. Chair, the list of issues we can raise in this meeting is rather long. On behalf of JIRRA, however, I am sending a longer and more comprehensive statement by way of submission tonight or tomorrow morning. The statement will provide details of the humanitarian and security costs of the war and the destructions unleashed in Oromia. At this point, I will limit myself only to the context. The cause of the war, both in Oromia and in Tigray, is primarily a political difference, the desire to suppress that difference by eliminating the people who embody and represent that difference. In the context of Oromia, the Oromo Liberation Army, the Oromo Liberation Front. A difference on the future direction of the country is also a part of the problem. As you know, the question for Oromos was, will Oromos enjoy genuine self-rule within the federal framework? And will they then exercise their constitutional right to self-determination? Or will they be subjected to another experiment to centralize power and repress expression of cultural difference and distinct identities? Unlike what many people assume, and the commentators earlier in the Tigray hearing session have pointed out, the prime minister of this genocidal regime, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, is not a reformist leading the way to a democratic future. He is a restorationist in my view, of the old imperial order, insisting on, quote unquote, making Ethiopia great again. Contrary to what he claims, he is not the new leader up against the old regime, the old political dispensation. And he is part of the old EPRDF order, refusing the reform sought by the public and taking the country to a much older political dispensation of the imperial times. The Prime Minister's statements on several occasions indicated that his political mission is to save Ethiopia from Oromos. He reinforces the long-held Ethiopianist view that Oromos and the others of the Ethiopian state are a national security threat. The Prime Minister is wrongly lauded as a Nobel Peace Laureate because he, quote unquote, resolved the stalemate with Eritrea, when in fact his agreement with Eritrea was a secret war pact to form an alliance against Tigray and Oromia. To date, the content of the peace deal with Eritrea is unknown. In fact, what is happening on the ground today, the genocidal wars he is conducting in Oromia and Tigray, are a testament to how erroneous that judgment of the Nobel Committee was. Also, contrary to the claims he made when he launched the military operations in Oromia and declared a state of emergency there, he is not for law enforcement. In fact, he violated the constitution, postponed the constitutionally scheduled election, arrested all the Oromo political leaders, staged political show trials, and violently repressed constitutional demands of the Sidama, the Walaita, the Gedio, the Kamant, the Agao, and of course, the Oromo. In the last few days alone, after declaring a nationwide state of emergency, he has launched a renewed mass arrest of Oromo and Tigrayan civilians, Oromo young people to be forcefully conscripted for war efforts in Tigray. The impact, I will quickly rush through the impact. Of course, the devastating impact on the people at home is obvious, but the devastating impact on our people, our communities here, is even shocking. This war on Tigray and on Oromia has a devastating consequence, not just for the people at home, but also for their compatriots here. The Oromos and the Tigrayans here live with the onerous psychological, financial, and social burdens that have disrupted their lives on many levels, be it at home, in schools, in their workplaces, and in their businesses. Psychologically and emotionally, the pain and trauma of loss of loved ones and the consequent mental health problems, including suicidal urges, are palpable. Financially, the burden of raising funds to support their compatriots in the absence of humanitarian aid that's blocked by the regime, is way too much for individuals to bear. Community members have had to sell their houses and businesses and spend their lifetime savings. So often, the less fortunate members had to slice their Centrelink benefits to send most of it to their loved ones at home. The war is taking a toll on their performance in workplaces, in schools. The war is taking a toll. It affects their working hours as they are too busy organizing fundraising or protests or organizing protests to advocate and speak out for the people, or to support those whose lives are in tatters because of the loss of immediate family members. And socially, their children bear the burden of attentive parents. I myself am a parent, a single father to a son. Parents preoccupied with endless series of meetings, protest rallies, and fundraising campaigns, etc. Needless to say, it takes an egregious toll on all of us here. And the recommendations we submit are very much parallel with what the group on Tsegaye was submitting earlier on. In our case, we would like Australia to help us bring peace and relief to our peoples, and to do so as a responsible international citizen, playing its role. And we submit the following to this committee for consideration. First, for Australia to discuss, for this committee to discuss the matter and take it to the parliamentary floor and pass a resolution that publicly condemns the ongoing genocidal war and the mass atrocity crimes thereof. And second, to put a diplomatic pressure on the regime using bilateral and multilateral sites of engagement to stop the war and start seeking a negotiated settlement, to decriminalize its adversaries and lift the proscription of OLA, OLF, and TDF as terrorist organizations, to allow unfettered access to humanitarian aid, to release all political prisoners and detainees kept in known and unknown detention centers, to conduct an international investigation of the crimes in Guji, Borana, Wolaga, and everywhere else, because these have been documented by Human Rights Watch and various other international human rights institutions, so that perpetrators of atrocious crimes such as genocide, ethnic cleansing, war crimes, crimes against humanity are all held accountable. And thirdly, we would like Australia to join other international initiatives, for example, the ones by the US and the EU and the United Nations, to find a solution to the multifaceted problems in Ethiopia, to stop hostilities and end the war, to offer humanitarian assistance, to assist in making perpetrators accountable for atrocities, helping in setting up a special prosecution for designing, managing, and executing a transitional justice program, to help in reconstruction of the economy and transformation of the relations among survivors of this war. Apart from what Australia does and ought to do on the international plane, we believe that domestically here in Australia ought to pay attention to the specific needs of the Oromo communities here. In particular, we would like the Parliament to alert and direct government departments such as the DHS to these specific impacts of war, trauma, and mental health needs, mental health challenges, as they make services available for members of these communities. And finally, we would like this committee to consider strengthening the support system for their businesses, finances, families, and mental health needs. I thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Truman or Mr. Kufi?